have to forgive me. I have a little flare-up on my toe, so at some point I might have to stop. If that happens, then forgive me. But it's great to be here with you all. I've been here now. I think this is my third time. Yeah, third time here at News, and it's great to see new faces. Great to see some old faces, and great to cover for Pastor Day. Love Pastor Day. Great guy. He's funny, right? Does he crack jokes with you guys? Pretty dry though. Yeah. All right. Today I want to share with you something that's been kind of been on my mind for a while, and it's it's a very large topic, okay? Because it deals with like the roots of everything in a certain kind of sense, and it's one of the root problems of humanity, the root problems of our society, and you can probably take a guess at it, and it has to do with selfishness, right? Selfishness, self-centeredness, to be self-serving. This is not something that is new in our day and age. In 2017, selfishness is not a new thing. As much as some of us may want to say it's on the rise, some of us will look at an observed society and will say, oh man, people are becoming much more selfish than they were before. But others may just argue that it's simply shifting in its expression. Okay? And one of those expressions would be the selfie, right? Something we see all the time. Probably, I mean, I'm sure some of us here do it. I don't know if you do it often or not, but selfies. Like people take selfies all the time, right? In Korea, everywhere in the world, with technology. Technology simply makes it easier to do that which is already in us to do. Okay, so I don't think necessarily that people are becoming more self-centered. It's just easier to express it because of technology. And it's not necessarily that we're more obsessed with ourselves than before. It just becomes a little bit easier to do it. So there's a few questions that I want to kind of answer today. One is, what does it mean to be selfish? Okay, what does it mean to be self-centered, self-serving? And I'm going to use these words synonymously, okay, together. Number two, is it really that bad? Is it really that bad to be self-centered? Okay, we kind of just take it for granted, growing up in the church maybe, that we think it's bad. Is it? Number three, what makes us and our society so selfish? Okay, now the easy answer is sin, which we just easily throw that out there, but what are some of the root causes for our self-centeredness? And then four, if this is a problem, what is the solution? How do you solve it? How do you fix it? So first, let me say that there's nothing wrong with the self in and of itself. Okay? There's nothing wrong with the self. The self exists. You just can't do anything about that. Thinking about yourself, caring about yourself, loving yourself is not bad. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, you already do it without even thinking about it. It just naturally happens. Psalm 139, a very famous psalm that I'm sure I hope that's not my phone, that we've heard before. And many of the psalms, in fact, they are self-reflective prayers offered to the Lord. Psalm 139, verse 14, it says, I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Okay, that kind of sounds a little self-centered, doesn't it? If you really want to twist it a little bit, you can think of it that way. But they're talking about the self. The problem is when the self takes on the way of the world. That's where the problem really kind of begins to enter in. And so let me read our passage today. This comes from 1 John chapter 2. So if you have your Bibles, you can turn there. You don't have to if you just want to hear it. But 1 John chapter 2, verses 15 to 17, is the Apostle John talking about the world. All right, so 1 John chapter 2, verse 15 to 17, the Apostle John says this. He says, do not love the world, or anything in the world. If anyone loves the world, love for the Father is not in them. For everything in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life comes not from the Father, but from the world. The world and its desires pass away, but whoever does the will of God lives forever. Okay, so here we see three things. You see the lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. Okay, according to Richard Foster, he wrote this book called The Celebration of Discipline, and we're going through this in our church these days. He says this: we fail to understand the force of this passage because of our tendency to relegate it all to sexual sin. We think lust is just about sexual sin, but it's actually more than that. The lust of the flesh refers to the failure to discipline the natural human passions. Okay, so think about that. The natural human passions. The failure to discipline those things. And then this other guy, C.H. Dodd, he says that the lust of the eyes refers to the tendency to be captivated by outward show, outward appearance. And then he defines the pride of life as pretentious egoism. Okay, egoism. Okay. So, we can easily see, that the natural human passions that we have, expressed by our consumer desires, they take over our lives much of the time, right? So, food. We think about food all the time, okay? We're probably thinking, what am I going to eat after this? Okay, it just occupies our mind. Gadgets. The new iPhone's out, right? And maybe you're thinking about that. Sex. Money. Promotions. All these things, they occupy our minds, right? And these are our natural human passions, and a lot of times we might struggle to exert self-control over these things. To discipline our desires, to discipline our consumption for these things. This is the lust of the flesh. This is what it refers to. Being captivated by outward show is the second one, the lust of the eyes. Being captivated by outward show. We are so easily taken in by the world, right? When you drive around Gangnam, and like all the flashing billboards and, all the, the glitz and the glamour, right? We listen to K-pop, we watch K-pop videos, we watch K-drama, and you just see a lot of beautiful people, right? And like in our neighborhood, at our church, Shinsadong, it's ridiculous. Like there's all these nice cars everywhere. I'm like, where do people get all the money to drive this stuff? It's crazy. There's just a lot of glitz and glamour, right? And it's very easy to be taken in by outward appearances and outward show, right? And then naturally, when we apply that to ourselves, we want people to notice us. Okay, so we put on an outward show, right? So it's kind of a natural thing that happens. And this, of course, reaches its climax with pretentious egoism, okay? Where we want to make more of ourselves than we actually are. Right? We want to impress people. We want to show something of ourselves that may not even actually be there. Right? So we impress, we want to feel better about ourselves, we want to keep up. In America we say we keep up with the Joneses, but here maybe in Korea we say keep up with the Kims, I don't know. But like we feel like we need to keep up with the latest fashions or keep up with the latest stuff, right? Now, is this bad? Are these things bad? And if so, why is it bad? So, food, gadgets, sex and marriage, money, promotions, these things aren't bad. Not bad at all. Okay? Glitz, glamour, nice cars, beautiful people. In and of itself, these things aren't bad. In and of itself. Wanting to be the best version of yourself, even on the physical appearance level, it's not necessarily bad. Okay? The problem is that all of these things lend itself to idolatry. It's so easy for these things to become idols in our lives, where we begin to worship these things, where we begin to worship the self. Right? Either these things become God to me, where I say, I will sacrifice all in order to get these things. Think about that for a second. A lot of times, people would even go into debt to try to get the latest things. That's a sacrifice of worship. Okay? Or I become God, where it's all about me. Right? Nothing else matters more than the fulfillment of me. Right? We can identify with this sentiment, right? Whatever gets in the way of me, I must stop it, I must crush it, I must destroy it, because I am what matters. Okay? And so everything kind of goes downhill from here. It's this idolatry. And this, of course, is nothing new. This is not new at all. In fact, it is so old we have to go back to Genesis. All right? It's from the very beginning. In Genesis 1, we see that humans are created in the image of God. Okay? We are made in His image. Just hold on to that. But just a couple pages later, in chapter 3, we reach for that forbidden fruit. Right? That from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which God told Adam and Eve not to eat it, because once you eat of it, death will enter into this world. Okay? And so the devil, very smart, crafty guy in the form of a serpent, he comes and he tempts Eve and he says, you will become like God, knowing good and evil. You will become like God, knowing good and evil. And what this means, in effect, is that you will get to be like God. You will get to be like Him, determining what is good and determining what is evil. Okay? Determining what is right, determining what is wrong. In other words, you don't need God to tell you anymore what is right and wrong. You don't need God to tell you anymore what is good and evil. You can decide. It's up to you. That was the nature of the temptation back in Genesis chapter 3. You are in charge. You are the God of your own life. You don't need God anymore. And we have a word for this. It is called autonomy. Okay, autonomy. It's taken from auto, which means self, and nomos, which means law. Self-law. I am a law unto myself. I make the rules. I am in charge. Okay? Does that make sense? Everybody following me so far? Back in the States, there's this cartoon, adult cartoon called South Park. Now, I never watched it, but back in the day when I was a youth pastor, my youth kids watched it, and, they would, mimic the characters. And one of the characters, I don't even know his name, but one of the characters would say, whatever, I do what I want. Right? Whatever, I do what I want. And in case you don't understand what I'm saying, he's saying, whatever, I do what I want. I do what I want. Okay? And this is kind of the mantra. This is the voice of our society, isn't it? Right? I do whatever I want to do. You can't tell me what to do. You can't tell me what not to do. I do what I want. Right? But is that bad? Is it bad? Why can't I just do what I want? Why can't we all just do what we want? Why is that bad? There are several reasons for this, but I want to focus on one that I think will be of most interest to people. When I simply do what I want to do, I'm the God of my life, right? I'm in charge. I answer to nobody. And when we are God, when we are in charge, there is no longer any standard. Okay? There's no longer any standard. If human beings are the standard, then which human being is the standard? Right? Which culture is the standard? Is Korean culture the standard? Is American culture the standard? Which one? Can you have multiple standards? Who gets to decide the standard? You gotta think about this right now. You're thinking on a societal level. Who gets to decide these things? Now, let's think about practical issues. Who gets to decide that homosexuality is okay? Who gets to make that call? Very controversial, right? Who gets to decide that murder is not okay? You need to start thinking about this. If everybody just does what they want. Are we simply born with moral knowledge? Knowing what's right and what's wrong? And if so, where does that come from? These are very important questions. I'm sure we've thought about it to some extent at some point, but very important questions. Now, how many people here are in college, or right around college age? Recently college graduated? Okay, great. And I assume most of us have probably gone to college or are about to go or something. All right, on a purely scientific level, that is, I'm talking about chemistry and physics, okay? Because those are the pure hard sciences that are, the philosophy of the university is based on. On a purely scientific level, there is zero basis for morality. Zero basis for morality. Morality, what is right and wrong, is not a scientific matter at all. Okay? That is why pure Darwinian evolutionists, they cannot provide any reason as to why morality should exist. They can't. Okay? And so, because they can't, there's no explanation for why we should do what we should do. It's just majority wins. Whatever majority of the people say it should be, that's what it is. But there's no actual logical reason on the basis of science as to why that should be. But the whole secular world is operating on the basis of science. Okay? As people of God, the church, we know that we are created in the image of God. And it is the image of God in every single human being on the face of the earth that gives us some semblance, not completely perfect, but some semblance, some little bit, some level of understanding right and wrong. Because we are created in His image, we know what is right and wrong. We may not know it fully, but we have an innate sense that murder is wrong. We know it. And it is His divine word that gives us the complete measure. If the image of God in us gives us some measure, it is His divine word that gives us the complete measure by which we can understand what is right and wrong, by which we can determine what is right and what is wrong. So, there has to be a standard that exists beyond us, that exists outside of us. It just can't be here. I decide. You decide. You decide. You decide. Everybody decides. It can't just stay here. It has to. A standard has to exist outside of us and above us. If we ourselves are the standard, then there really is no standard. Okay? It will always change from person to person. And if this is the case, that the standard changes from person to person, then this will not lend itself to the flourishing of humankind. Okay, I'm going to explain this. To the flourishing of the human race. If everybody does whatever they want, then you will see an end to human flourishing. Case in point, Judges chapter 17 through 21. 5 chapters. Okay? I'm not going to read it because it's 5 chapters long, and then the sermon time will be over. But I encourage you to read this if you've never read it. Alright? Judges 17 through 21. In this 5-chapter section of the Bible, we see lying, stealing, aberrant, deviant sexuality, rape, murder, the dismembering of a body cut into 12 pieces, near genocide, and a free-for-all kidnapping of women by men. All in 5 chapters of the Bible. It is by far probably the most disturbing section of the Bible. Okay? You read it, you're like, oh my goodness, I can't believe this happened. you know? And I never learned this in Sunday school. Now, children's ministry don't touch this passage, right? Now, do you know what it says in the beginning of this 5-chapter section and the end? They say the same thing in the beginning and at the end of this 5-chapter section. In chapter 17, verse 6, and in chapter 21, verse 25. The same line is repeated, and it goes like this. In those days, Israel had no king, and everyone did as they saw fit. Did you hear that? In those days, Israel had no king, everyone did as they saw fit. Everybody did whatever they wanted to do. When everyone does as they see fit, it leads to chaos. It leads to a complete loss of order. A complete loss of morality. When everybody does whatever they want. Whatever. I do what I want. This lies at the heart of what we call today relativism. Relativism. It's all relative. You believe that? That's fine. You believe that? That's fine. You believe that? That's fine. You do what you want to do. You do what you want. You do what you want to do. Who am I to say you can't do what you want to do? That's relativism. There are no absolute standards, no absolute truth, no objective morality. I, the self, the individual, I am the standard. Okay? Now, is this the kind of society that you want? Most people in the world, this is what they want. At least that's what's shown on media. In the universities, this is what they say. This is what they say they want. Okay? But is this really the kind of world that you want? Where everybody just does whatever they want to do? Do you realize that most of us here, we would not be even fully physically functional? Like our physical bodies would not be fully functional, most of us here, if there was no, if the world had no standards and no order. You know why? Because by now, most of us would have been hit by a car. Right? You have traffic lights in place, you have traffic lanes. There are standards. Okay? And if everybody just did what they want, most of us would be maimed. Right? That's just reality. The only one who enjoys true chaos and free reign is Satan. He's the only one who enjoys it because he opposes God's created order. He stands in opposition to human flourishing. He stands in opposition to what God really wants for us, which is the fullness of life. But you can't have the fullness of life if you don't have some level of standard. It's absolutely impossible. And unfortunately, our society, we are progressively moving in this direction of relativism. Right? And yet it's nothing new. It is as old as Genesis 3. It's been there from the very beginning. And so, yes, living for the self is bad. To answer the question, right? Relativism, us playing God, us being in charge, us setting the standards, is one of the root causes of self-centeredness. And of course, this one of the natural results of this kind of relativistic thinking, where I am the maker of my destiny, is that I get to decide, right? I get to decide this and that. I get to decide what's wrong and what's right. But you know what else I get to decide? I get to decide that God doesn't exist. You know, it's a very arrogant statement, but that's exactly what German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, right, what he summed up in 1882 as, a long time ago, as the resulting conclusion of Western rationalist and scientific man. He said, God is dead. And you know that is the sum statement of atheism, right? If God doesn't exist, and spiritual reality doesn't exist, and if all that exists is this material world, that which I can see, that which I can touch, That's where I can hear, smell, and taste. If those are the only the five senses, if all that exists is the material world, which we call materialism, and there's nothing beyond that, then I might as well just live for myself. Right? I might as well try to make myself as happy as I possibly can in this short life that I have, where there's kind of no ultimate purpose because there's nothing after this life. There's no spiritual reality. There's no spirit world. There's nothing. It's just this physical world. So make the most of it. Live for the self. Okay. This is the natural result of atheism. Just make the best of it because that's all it is. Right? And it's materialism because material world. That's all there is. Okay. Now, most of us here are probably not atheists. But what many of us don't realize is that this overarching mindset, this atheistic worldview, has greatly affected society at a very subconscious level. And it affects us here. It really does. Okay? Not just externally affecting us, but actually internally it affects us. Such that many of us, as self-proclaiming Christians, we live and we function on a day-to-day level with the same exact atheistic worldview. We don't think it, of course. Of course we know God exists. Of course we believe in Him. Of course. Okay? But Monday through Saturday, our daily lives, very often, we live as if God doesn't exist. Okay? As if God's existence has no bearing on my daily life. If He does exist, or if He doesn't exist, it doesn't matter. Because my life would look exactly the same anyway. You get what I'm saying? Okay? My life would look and function exactly the same, whether God exists or whether He doesn't. We call this practical atheism. Atheism in practice. And many, many Christians live this way. God might as well not exist because it makes no difference to my daily life. Except in emergencies, of course. Right. Maybe finals times is coming up. God, give me help in my studies, right? Then the prayers start coming out, right? But on a day-to-day level, would it look much different if you suddenly declared you're atheist? Would tomorrow look different than last Monday? It's something to think about, right? And this here is a root cause for why we live for the self. Deep down, many of us, take this with a grain of salt, okay? Deep down, many of us, we don't really believe that there is a greater reality than what I can see, hear, taste, smell, and touch. We say we believe it, and we might really honestly believe it in our hearts, but it's not at the level of reality where it actually affects us. And if it's not there, then can we really say we believe it? You know what I'm saying? Okay? The things that we really believe, we act out on it. I believe this chair is going to hold me up when I sit down on it, and I sit on it. And there's an act of faith that's involved in sitting on the chair. If we really did believe in spiritual reality, then it would show in our lives. Now, I'm saying this as general blanket statements. Okay? I don't know your individual lives. You guys might be like totally saintly and like totally living in faith. So like, this is not an accusation. Please don't take it that way. But by and large, the state of the church today, particularly in the Western world, and I include South Korea in the Western world here, is that we would see it in our lives. right? Our lives would look radically different if we really believed in God, if we really believed in who He is, if we really believed all of His words. We would live for greater purposes than simply for the self. Right? We would do things that actually required faith and trust in God. You know, think about that for a second. When was the last time you actually had to exert faith in God? Right? Someone's like, oh no. You know? And why is that? We gotta ask ourselves. So this is the state of much of the world. It's the state of much of Christianity today. Now, if we simply stop the message here, it'd be pretty sad. Right? Like, oh my gosh, this is so horrible. You know, gloomy. You know, very bleak. Man, this just kind of stinks. But there's good news. There is good news. Let us read the good news. Philippians chapter 2, verses 3 through 11. It goes like this. Sorry, let me load this up real quick. Alright, it says this. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves. Not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of the others. In your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus, who being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness, and being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. Therefore God exalted him to the highest place and gave him the name that is above every name, that at the name of Jesus every knee should bow, in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue acknowledge that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. Amen. All right. So, we believe in a God that did not simply stay up in heaven and stay out of our lives. That is not our God. Right? We believe in a God who came down to earth, who got involved with us, right? Who came to show us that he is real. He is not the God of atheism. He's not a God that is dead. He is a God that is very real. Right? He could have very easily just stayed away, but he didn't. He came to us to show us what he's really like. It's Jesus, of course. Jesus showed us that God is not dead. He showed us that he is He's very much alive and active. Okay? And that he's all about life. He's all about restoring life. He's all about healing and saving and teaching and building up. He is all about life and not death. Jesus showed us that God is indeed in charge and that he actually does have standards. How did he show us? Because in Romans 8, chapter 3 and 4, it says that Jesus, he fulfilled all the righteous requirements of the law. What that means is, the requirements of the law is that there are standards of God that we couldn't fulfill. But Jesus fulfilled those on our behalf when he went to the cross. Okay? That's a whole other message that takes a lot to explain. But Jesus, he set right our humanity by coming down, by becoming human, showing us what humanity really looks like. And I'm going to talk about that in a second. Jesus died for the problems that we've been talking about here. He died for this whole warped sense of self that stems from doing whatever we want to do. This whole sense of self-idolatry where I am God, right? And then this whole mentality of thinking and living as if God doesn't exist. Jesus came to die for these problems, for these issues, okay? To eradicate the power of sin. Jesus died on the cross to deal with these things, to pay the penalty of the sin, to undo the power of the sin in our lives, and to set us free from it. Okay, releasing us in the power of the resurrection, releasing us into a new place with his Holy Spirit in us, a whole new humanity. He sets us forward, sets us free from this dim darkness, from this chaos of relativism, from this depression of God is dead. He sets us free from all of that and launches us forward into something absolutely amazing called life, eternal life, okay? Which has actually already begun. And so now, as freed and saved sons and daughters of God, we are called not to live for ourselves alone. Instead, we are now called to do nothing out of selfish ambition, to do nothing out of vain conceit, rather in humility, to value others above ourselves, not looking to our own interests, but each to the interests of the others. Okay? Now, this is a verse you've probably heard many times, but think about it. This is the complete opposite of the way of the world. The way of the world, as described in 1 John chapter 2:16, is the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. Right? That self-centeredness that we've been talking about. And now here, in humility, value others above yourselves. Right? Consider the needs of others above yourselves. Don't just look to your own interests, look to the interests of others. Put the interests of others before yours. Who does that? When was the last time you put the interests of someone else above your own? You know, like, I don't know, I can't remember. You know, I struggle with that sometimes, right? Parents, we can easily say, oh yeah, I do it for my kids all the time. but you know, like, really, when was the last time we did it? It's totally different from the way of the world. What God calls us to and what He invites us to. Now, let me expand on this just a little bit. In Psalm 135, near the end of the psalm, it says that you become like what you worship. Okay? You become like what you worship. So, for example, if you worship money, you become greedy. Okay? If you worship sex, you become lustful. If you worship physical appearance, you devote yourself to looks. Right? You see how it works, right? You become like what you worship. When you worship God, you become like Him. Okay? Think about that. When you become like God, you worship Him. When I'm talking about worship here, I'm talking about adoration. I'm not just talking about what we do when we sing. That's part of it. But I'm talking about, what do you adore? What do you obsess over? What do you constantly think about? That's what I'm talking about when I say worship. What do you really love? You know? I love food. Right? I'm thinking about, food. I'm thinking about what I'm going to eat. I love it. Do you think about God like that? Right? Or, I love money. I'm thinking about ways I can make money. I'm just constantly on my mind. Okay, this is what I mean when I'm talking about worship. You become like what you worship. And if you worship God, I love the Lord, I can't get enough of Him, you will become like Him. You will become like Him. Now, based on this statement, when you worship yourself, you would think that you would become more like yourself. But you actually become less human. You become less yourself. Because humans, think about this, okay? Humans are made in the image of God. Humans are not made in the image of themselves. Okay? And so, to be truly human, the very essence of humanity is to be in the image of God, is to be like Him. That's what it means to truly be human. You don't truly be human by trying to be more yourself. You will go nowhere with that. Because you are made in His image. Okay? So we will become more like God. But not in the way that Adam and Eve were tempted to, right? Where Satan said, you will be like God. No, we're not talking about like that. But instead, you're going to be like God in the way that Jesus showed us. How He was. How He lived His life. What He looked like. Right? And what did Jesus look like? One of the primary characteristics of God, as we see it in Jesus, is his consistent downward movement as a servant. Jesus is always coming down. He's always going down, right? Philippians 2 is all about this. Jesus goes from nature of God, equality with God, to nature of a servant in the likeness of man. Okay? He's moving down. He goes to the nature of a servant. And then he goes to obedience to death, even death on a cross. Jesus bends down and washes his disciples' feet. Jesus is always moving down. That is the nature of who he is. It is the nature of our God. And it is almost scandalous to say this. Right? Because when we think about God, God's exalted. He's high and lifted up. And yes, that is true. So, therefore, we naturally think, how dare we say that God is a God who comes down? But that's exactly what he does. And as Advent, Christmas season comes up, don't miss this. God is the God who comes down for us. Advent means coming. His coming down. And this is it's always the movement of our Lord. He's a God who serves. Absolutely amazing. Right? And then I think about me. And I'm always trying to go up. Right? I'm always trying to put myself in a higher position. I'm trying to put myself in more comfort. I'm trying to be in a place where I don't have to serve so much. And yet Jesus is always doing the opposite. You know, that's the nature of our God. It even says he made himself nothing. It's crazy, right? Jesus is everything, but he makes himself nothing. It's the nature of our God that he serves, he pours himself out, he gives, he gives, he gives. He gives his life, he gives his spirit, he gives us life, he gives us provision and care. He is always pouring himself out. Awesome God, right? Now, if this is the God you truly worship, you will become like him too. You will become a servant as well. It will happen. Now, human beings, we're problem solvers. Right? When something's wrong, we see a problem in the world, we try to fix it. If selfishness and self-centeredness and self-servingness, if that is wrong, how do we fix it? How do you change the world? How do you reverse the pattern of the world? What do we do? The answer is all here. Do the will of God and serve. About 3 years ago, almost to the day, 3 years ago, I was in a subway around 11 p.m. here in Seoul. And, you know, when you're in the subway at night, it's very typical to see drunk people coming home, right? From office dinners that very often include heavy drinking. Right? It's just kind of in the culture. Although I think it's getting better, yes? Maybe? Okay, but yeah, at least 3 years ago it would be a lot. And so one day I was just standing in my normal spot. I have a normal spot in the subway. It's either the 4 or the 1. You know, I don't like the 2 or the 3. Just right next to the door. And about 15 feet away, I noticed a commotion as I'm looking down the subway car, and a young lady had thrown up, and she was holding the remaining parts of her. She was trying to catch as much as she could. You know, she was holding it in her hand, and she had some on her hair. You know, the rest was on the ground, and so obviously the next stop she just runs out, and so I look over and I see the throw up on the ground. But not only that, there's a man two of the men standing next to her, like one of them got on his briefcase, and then the other guy got on his jacket, and so people were just kind of handing them like napkins and wet naps and trying to help them whatever way they could, right? And so, my initial thinking when I saw this young lady is that, oh man, she's drunk, and the immediate thought is, if you can't handle it, don't do it. Very judgmental. Okay, Pharisee. I'm a Pharisee right here. But as I thought about it more, it's not necessarily that simple, right? If she refuses to drink, then most likely she can't get along with her coworkers, right? And if she can't get along with her coworkers, she can't get a promotion in the future. And then she could potentially lose her job, lose her income, both of which are very hard to come by. So it's not very simple. You can't just write people off and just judge them that easily. Right? And then, even when I saw her, she didn't necessarily look drunk. So she could have been sick, but Pharisee that I am. Right? Anyways, the commotion kind of dies down. There's not much I can do. People handed them napkins, so I just go back to my phone and just Facebook newsfeed, right? What we all probably normally do. And then I noticed like a couple of students, college students standing in front of me, and they're like looking over there and they're talking about something over there. And I'm like, oh, what could be happening again? So I look over. And right where the lady threw up, I couldn't believe my eyes. There was a young man, probably a college student. He was bending over, squatting down, and cleaning up everything. He was cleaning up everything that was left on the floor. I'm like, oh my goodness. What would possess this young man to do that? Right? I mean, like, leave it to the subway staff to clean it, right? But here's this young man sacrificing himself to serve who? To serve the girl who already left? To serve the rest of us in the subway? And all I could think of was the Good Samaritan story, And all I could think of was, man, I'm so lousy. Like, I don't want to get dirty. I don't want to get my fingers like, like, don't you value clean skin? Right? As soon as you touch something in public space, you want to go wash your hands. Like, and the smell? Who wants to be near that, right? But here's this young man sacrificing himself for the sake of others. And I thought to myself, right here, this is the hope of the nation. This is the hope of Korea. This is the hope of our society. When people sacrifice themselves to serve. This is servanthood. This is Jesus, right there. This transforms the world. Little acts like this, on a daily, regular basis, this transforms the world. Selfishness does not transform the world. Self-centeredness, self-serving, doesn't change anything. It just makes things worse. If we give ourselves over to self-centeredness, where we simply live to do what we want, it will lead to eventual chaos and destruction. Just read the book of Judges. But if you want to see the world change for the better, if you want to see Korea change, if you want to see society change, follow Jesus' example and go downward and serve. Follow the example of this young Korean man and get dirty and serve. It's so hard, I know. But we bring transformative change to the world from the bottom up, not from the top down. It happens from the bottom up. It happens through all the small things that we do. Not so much from the big things per se. We will not change the world overnight. Nothing of lasting significance changes overnight or in one day. It takes one step at a time. It's like helping an old lady cross the street. It comes in the form of letting someone in front of you while driving. Anybody drive? No, okay. I hate letting people in front of me, right? Right? But, that could change the whole traffic atmosphere, Picking up someone else's trash. Right? Giving up your seat on the subway or bus. Even greeting your neighbors. Man, my apartment, it's so cold. People do not inza at all. They don't greet each other. I don't know if you guys have that in your apartments or where you live, but it's so sad. That used to be such a strong point of our culture here in Korea, but we're losing it. And so, Jesus started this movement. He started this movement. He released us from the sinful self. He broke the power of sin. That power that was holding us down just for the self. And then he modeled servanthood for us. So friends, let us look to him as our example. He is the servant king. May we follow in his footsteps and be agents of change for this world. Amen? Let's pray. And in this time as we pray, I just want to invite you to come before the Lord, and if there's anything in you where you need to confess to God, where you need to turn away from certain mindsets and attitudes that you may have held on to, like that mindset of relativism, where I just do whatever I want. It's my life, I'm in charge. If you need to repent of that, I just invite you to do that. And then maybe one of the harder ones to distinguish and determine to see if you actually are struggling with this is that practical atheism, where it's so easy to live as if God doesn't exist. Right? Just think about tomorrow, think about Monday. Does the existence of God affect what you're going to do tomorrow and how you live your life tomorrow? If he didn't exist, would it change? If you were an atheist tomorrow, would your life look any different? Why is that? And just start to talk with God and imagine with him, Lord, how can my life look different with you? Where you make all the difference. What does that look like? Show me, Lord. And help me to live differently. And perhaps the best way that this can be lived out is by actually engaging in service. And I'm not necessarily talking about a scheduled thing that you do on Saturdays, though it can include that, of course. But even just the mindset of serving those around you. How can I help people on the street? How can I help people that I don't even know? And how can I move beyond being only concerned about myself? This is what Jesus came to set you free from. This is why he says you don't need to worry. I'll take care of you. And so he invites us to a much larger life. So Lord, we come to you, and there's a lot that we may need to consider today. Lord, we confess to you that Very often we just live doing whatever we want to do, as if we are the God of our own lives. Lord, very often we live in such a way where it doesn't matter whether you exist or not. God, we just want to confess this to you. And perhaps it's very hard to imagine even what it would look like to have a different kind of life where your existence actually mattered. And so I pray that you would lead us in prayer, lead us in our imaginations to be able to conceive this and to begin to have a change in our lives. And I pray, Lord, that you would help us to respond to this call and this example that you set for us, Lord, of going down and serving others, making ourselves nothing. Lead us in this, Lord. We entrust ourselves to you, God. Thank you for this community. Thank you that in all of this, in our transformation, in our sanctification, in our becoming more and more like you, it's not something that we do alone, but we do it together. And so I just pray blessings over this community here at News, and ask, Lord, that you would strengthen and fortify them to walk together in humility and to live for you, God, and to serve you, to serve this Banpo area, to serve the Greater Seoul area, Lord.